Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Joe Cioffi. It is Monday and we've got a busy couple of days ahead as we have the next in a series of storm systems moving on through. I hope everybody had a good time last night with respect to the Super Bowl now that that's over with, and the Eagles are the champions, which they actually was a very good game. I enjoyed it very, very much. Okay, so we got a couple of things to look at, and I want to throw a couple of caveats right off the bat with respect to Wednesday. Be very careful what you use on the forecast for the snow maps, because a lot of that that's being shown as snow could also be freezing rain and sleet, that it's adding up as snow altogether. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the amounts skewed up on the high side on a lot of those snow maps. Not saying that those amounts are impossible. I'm just saying to be careful with the amounts being generated, because, you know, judging from the lower atmosphere and how warm it's going to get in some inland areas eventually, that might be somewhat overdone. I also think that there will be a colder look to this at the surface in many locations inland. The models did not do a good job on Sunday in inland areas where it wound up being colder, and there were some interesting snowfall amounts that occurred in some places, like in the Catskills, for example. There were some areas that got 10 plus inches. There was a prolonged period of snow to rain in parts of northwest New Jersey. Didn't make a huge difference, but it was longer than what models had forecasted. And I think the cold air may be a little bit more important in this particular event, because the surface is setting up a bit differently. So let's take a look at what we got. I think what I'll do is I'll start off with my own snowfall forecast map with what I'm predicting, and of course, you know, I'm kind of, you know, super focused on my own area here, so to start off with. But this is what I went for, and you can see the line. You know, it's never going to be an exact straight line like how I drew this, obviously, but I'm going for a coating to an inch over central New Jersey, southeastern Pennsylvania, down into north central Maryland, and then into northern Virginia. Then I've got this band, a southern band of 1 to 3 inches, cutting across just north of the Turnpike in New Jersey, over toward maybe, say, North Queens, northern Nassau, northwestern Suffolk County, on the southern edge of 1 to 3 on Long Island. And then you've got that extending on up into northern Bergen County, eastern Passaic, and then, of course, through Morris and Warren counties. But you go into northwestern Warren, Hunterdon County, western Passaic, in that 3 to 6 inch band that runs through much of eastern Pennsylvania, across the Hudson Valley north of Route 84, and then on up in Connecticut north of Route 84. And then I actually threw in a 6 to 8 inch band north of Poughkeepsie, on up toward Kingston and into the northeasternmost counties, up into northern Pennsylvania. So this is we've got no blocking high. That's the thing. Without a high, there's a high going out to the north, but that's just it. It's going out. There's nothing that's going to hold that cold air in and just prolong the snow and sleet for the coastal areas. But I think there's a fair chance that it might hold on a lot longer for inland spots. So we'll go right to what's happening here. And I'm going to start with some of the shorter range models. You know, one argument that can be made, by the way, I'm going to start with the NAM. And let me just make this a little wider for you. So there's your GFS, but let's bring up the NAM, and we're going to go close. This is the one thing that's got me a little concerned with respect to Wednesday. First off, you've got this area of snow that's moving across the Ohio Valley, moving into the Ohio Valley, that is going to produce a coating to a couple of inches in some places, and then that's just going to weaken out as it moves eastward. There'll be some leftover clouds. Actually, the NAM kind of holds on to some of those snow showers here tomorrow morning. Whether they survive or not, I mean, they'll be short-lived. And then the cold high parks itself up into upstate New York. And here's that the area of snow with low pressure in eastern Kentucky Wednesday morning. By 10 o'clock, it is snowing in the northern half of New Jersey, almost all of Pennsylvania except the extreme south. And you can see this area of freezing rain that's being indicated. That winds up by 1 in the afternoon. North Jersey still snowing. South of Route 78, it's mostly rain. You're changed over on Long Island at this point. But this is where the NAM might have the better idea with respect to the cold air damming down. This is all freezing rain, and when you look at some of the liquid amounts of precip that it's generating here with this, it's producing anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 an inch of liquid falling as freezing rain. So this is something we're going to be paying very close attention to, watching those surface temperatures, watching the wind direction. If cold air is going to try and drain from the north. Remember, all of upstate New York and up through New England is under deep snow cover here, so that's going to hold on to that cold air a lot longer. And we saw that happen on Sunday, so that's why I'm a little nervous here. And then it moves on out to the northeast, and by midnight, or long before midnight, you start to get, this is 4 p.m., 7 p.m., so 10 p.m., it's all done already. So this is whatever falls during the day into Wednesday evening. Now, let me show you why, again, just the reason of my caution here. You look at the total snowfall. Again, how much of this is actual snow and how much of this is freezing rain remains to be seen. I could use, let's see if we could take it, does they have a positive snow growth? Yes. So, I mean, the positive snow growth is a little less bullish than the 10 to 1, but, you know, again, we have to figure out what falls as what. I did look at some of the statistical numbers for LaGuardia, for example, where the first 2/10 of an inch of rain, of liquid that falls Wednesday morning could could fall as snow right up through 1 o'clock. So, you know, that could give a little more upside to the areas north and west. I think I feel pretty comfortable with what I've got at the moment, but you know, these things always get you nervous one way or the other. And we can go to the GFS model, which the late afternoon model run was about the same as the prior, but it has the same idea here. You can see the high is in New Brunswick, the low into eastern Kentucky. If you had any kind of blocking here, or if you had the NAO crashing down from where it is and getting closer to neutral, you might force a redevelopment here on a warm front that is out off the Virginia coast, but you don't have that, unfortunately, for snow lovers, and as a result, that surface low has a free wheel to ride up the mountains with a minimal amount of redevelopment. Though we're going to watch, sometimes you could still be fooled and you wind up with a little, you know, low that forms on the warm front and cuts some of that warm air off. Even the GFS is reflecting this area of freezing rain later tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening over parts of northeastern Pennsylvania, and for sure the Hudson Valley on up through northern Connecticut and central Mass, and then running up to the northeast. Snowfall amounts on the GFS are actually pretty bullish when you look at it, producing some significant snows even for the Boston area. For Boston on up through Hartford, the GFS gives us some pretty decent amounts if you follow it along. Northern New Jersey, that bluish, whitish blue area is 3 inches, and that actually on the GFS comes down to about New York City. You want to be conservative on this. You can cut these numbers in half. I think that would probably, I wouldn't have too much of a problem with that as far as a forecast is concerned for Wednesday. Why don't we pull up the whole U.S. so you can see the extent of the snow, and I'll loop it back and you can watch it move along. And in fact, you know, we can go to the 24-hour because this will at least show you the weather systems moving along. Here's the one in the Ohio Valley right now, producing, you know, some 1 to 3 inch snows being indicated. And I think it's fair to say that that area weakens because you don't see much going on to the east. But now you start to generate some snows on Tuesday night, Wednesday, and this is our system as it moves out of the Ohio Valley and through the Northeast. You've got this next area of snow from the northern Rockies down into the plains and Midwest for the end of the week. That actually goes by across northern Pennsylvania and upstate New York. Looks like some 1 to 3 inch snows with that, and you've got, you know, more snow being shown up in the northern Rockies. The next wave that's going to be coming out in this very busy pattern, you've got stronger systems and weaker systems all in the mix moving through, and some of them have upper air support and some don't. The next one for next weekend goes by well to the west, and you can see where the snow with that is. Actually goes north of Chicago and just north of Detroit, across Nebraska through Iowa and on up through Wisconsin and in through Michigan, and even some snows back over into the Colorado Rockies and through Wyoming with that, as some of that drops down into the southwest. And then as we head on to another system that runs up, looks like to the western lakes here. And oh, what is that? At the end of the period, a little bit of snow shows up on day 10, which brings us almost out to February 15th. Upper air analysis through all of this, always fun and dandy and part of the mystery of where we're going. With respect to the overall pattern, I'm still thinking that the latter part of this month we are going to see some blocking developing at some point. I would expect that. That's what I'm expecting. But you know, you still have this problem here with where the trough and the ridge is, and in fact, you know, one of the things that the model seems to be doing is actually correcting that ridge. Instead of bringing it further east, it's actually correcting it further to the west over time. At least that was what the GFS was guilty of earlier, and you can see it here. It's still out in almost into the Gulf of Alaska. Deep trough eventually winds up forming in the west for a day or two before that gets kicked out to the east. But I mean, overall, this pattern just does not look really all that viable with respect to snow for the eastern part of the United States. You start to see maybe some signs of a little bit of higher pressures back up late in the period, but the model's been doing that for the last couple of days. So if and when it appears, or if it appears, remains the big open question down the road. And you know, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. What kind of pattern were we going to go into? And at least initially, it looked like we were getting into something that looked like what we had from mid-December to mid-January. But it seldom plays the same. And while it rhymes for places further to the west, in the plains, in the upper Great Lakes. You never really got this trough to dive far enough south. You know, again, the ridge remains in the wrong place. The trough remains in the wrong place. So we've got some upper air atmospheric work to do. And again, to show you also the volatility of the teleconnections, which today and yesterday, in fact, kind of flipped. But here's your PNA now, all negative because of that upper high being more further west than it already is. It's impacting the PNA, keeping it mostly negative. The EPO, at least, is negative throughout, so that maybe keeps it from getting too warm and blowtorch-ish in the east. But look at that NAO, by the way, which gets off the wall positive in a few days and then starts this descent toward the neutral line. And by the way, notice, we're going to see if this, let's watch for continuity tomorrow, because you've got the EPO rising toward neutral around February 19th, 20th. You've got the PNA spiking toward neutral around February 19th, 20th. And you've got the NAO crashing to neutral on February 19th, 20th. So these are big changes by all three of the major indices. We might want to look at that time frame, February, let's say February 19th, 20th, 21st, somewhere in that window where something could happen of consequence. maybe something more important than a system like Wednesday, which is going to be a moderate producer of weather across the Northeast and the northern Mid-Atlantic states, but you know, maybe it might be pointing to something of greater magnitude as we move toward what would be President's Day. Here's the Weather Service's forecast, by the way, for Mount Holly for snow, which is showing the 4 to 6 inch amounts for northwestern New Jersey, and actually has some 6 to 8 inch amounts for parts of northeastern Pennsylvania. Don't forget, by the way, the areas that are not showing up here are outside that station's, well, outside that Weather Service office's jurisdiction. So you have to pull it up on the individual map for that, you know, that you want to look at. So if I'm going to put up Mount Holly, that's Mount Holly. I'll put up the area that Upton, which is southeastern New York, and what they're forecasting. And why did that do that? Did I mess it up? Oh, that's because I put in an extra letter. Now you got it. So here's what Upton is going for, which generally less than an inch on Long Island, 1 to 2 coastal Connecticut to about New York City, 2 to 3 for northeastern New Jersey, southern areas of the Hudson Valley, 3 to 4 as you get up toward Route 84, and 6 to 8 as you go north of Route 84. These systems like this can be really tough because you know you got this NAM model in a situation like this where you have a lot of warm air advecting up the eastern seaboard. You could wind up with a solid couple of hours, you know, a fast 2 to 3 inches of snow before it goes over to any kind of mixed precip or just plain rain. So you know, a lot to consider here, and still a couple of more runs to go. Weatherman Nick wants the Baltimore-Washington map. All right, give me a shot here. Let me see if I could find it. And I'm thinking that might be LWX. Let me just take a look. I'm guessing here, so let's see if I could find it. All right, LWX. Yep. So here's your map for Baltimore. I'll bring it up to the top for you, and you can see. You can, by the way, you can access any of these at weather.gov, and just go to your local National Weather Service website page and find either a direct link to it, or they may have just, you know, find the winter on the menu, and this will bring you there. But you can see generally less than an inch for Baltimore, Washington, D.C. You start to get into some 1 to 2 inch amounts as you go up into northern and northwestern Maryland, and on over into West Virginia. Generally an inch or less across northern Virginia. And here's, by the way, just to give you where all the watches and warnings are as of 6 o'clock this evening. We have a large part of the Northeast under a winter storm watch, except for the coast. And you've got winter storm watches for most of Maine, all of New Hampshire, Vermont, most of Massachusetts, most of New York State except the extreme south, northwestern Connecticut, and northern and northeastern Pennsylvania. We've got winter weather advisories throughout eastern Iowa, Illinois, southern Wisconsin, southwestern Michigan, northern Indiana, northern Missouri. This is for about a 1 to 3 inch snowfall there. Also some winter weather advisories up through northern Kansas. And there were winter storm warnings up for parts of Montana, but that has now, looks like they've taken all those down and brought them down to just advisory criteria. All right, let me bring myself back up forward, front and center. Here we go. I'm just trying to get everybody's questions in here. Curious. Yeah, you know, Anthony, we talked about this before when you messaged me about it. It actually also happened on Saturday with respect to Sunday's winter weather advisories, where there was this kind of giant hole when they initially put them up. The 4 counties, I think it was Wyoming and a couple of other counties, where they just didn't put the advisory up right away. You know, they become such a stickler for criteria that if it just misses criteria, they're not going to put it up. And I'm guessing that it must have fell just short of winter storm watch criteria, but would meet advisory criteria when it's time to put up the advisory, but they got plenty of time to do the winter weather advisory. But we'll see what the models do tonight. Maybe they'll be adding a few places during the overnight and tomorrow morning. There's plenty of time, being that it's Monday night and we're talking about an event for the daytime on Wednesday. TechMan 330, you are correct from pointing out the major cold snap coming to the east. Not happening. The ridge is too far to the west. We've been pointing that out the last few days, and that ridge in the west set up too far to the west. It needed to set up inside the west coast. Instead it's set up in the Gulf of Alaska, and that's no good. That brings cold air down into the plains. It brings it into the northern Rockies. It brings it into the Great Lakes, especially the western part of the Great Lakes. But it doesn't, and it actually does bring the cold shots into the eastern part of the U.S. We did get very cold here Friday night going into Saturday, and we're actually going to get pretty chilly tonight into tomorrow morning. But the problem is that with the ridge that far west, there's no staying power for that cold air. It goes out. If we had the upper air set up like we had back in mid-December to mid-January right now, coupled with the more active, stormier pattern, you'd have cold air overwhelming all over the place. But the ridge is just not in the right spot. And the trough, as a result, is not in the right spot for the east. It's just too far to the west. Running through all your questions. Shelly Man Studios 20K, I guess that depends on where you are with respect to whether the season's been disappointing when it comes to snow. You got to give me a location so I can put it into some kind of perspective, because if you're in the Northeast, including coastal areas of the Northeast, you're still running with above normal snowfall for the season to date. And if you're just inland of the Northeast northward, you've had quite a snowy winter indeed. Numbers at Syracuse are pretty large, approaching 100 inches for the season there. Rochester's right behind. So it's been busy, because a lot depends on your location. First winter storm watch for Albany County. Is that true, really? Is this the first winter storm watch for Albany? Jesus, it seemed to me like they've had some winter storm warnings up already. They may have just gone directly to warnings in some cases. Maybe that's why the watches haven't been used, given some of these systems. So that's interesting, Timothy. My memory normally used to be a lot better, so I'm having trouble thinking back over the last couple of months. Stephen Franco, will the trough eventually set up more east into late February and March? I think we're going to have to look for that NAO to come into play here. That might be the one saving grace for winter weather and snow lovers going into later in this month and going into March. Rather than see that original pattern we had, but I think the door is open for the NAO to come into play here. We'll see. Okay, Shellyman, you're in Bridgeport. Well, you know what? Just north of you, it hasn't been disappointing. If you go to Danbury, if you go up along 84 and go north of there, it hasn't been disappointing. I got to see what's Bridgeport's numbers. Hang on a second, because I'm trying to, at least from the standpoint of, you got to have perspective here, folks, and a good knowledge of climo for your area, because a lot of times, there's let's call them overblown expectations over what winters are supposed to be like, because if you go back through the last 30 or 40 years, there were far more winters with snowfalls below average than not. And by the way, I'm just pulling up Bridgeport so far this season, 20.1 inches. The average snowfall to date at Bridgeport is 14.9. So you are 6 inches, or almost 30% above average. That's a pretty sizable departure. And last year at this time, you were at 17. So you are running ahead of last year, and you're running ahead of the averages. So just to give you perspective, winter is not done yet, but you got to be, you got to use perspective to see where your numbers are with respect compared to normal. Could this overperform with snow and ice? I think it's possible. Let's watch and see how the cold air sets up Tuesday night into Wednesday. If that high is a little stronger, holds on a little longer, if there's more of a northeast wind, it could. We'll watch model trends over the next 24 hours to see if they turn colder as we get closer to the event. And yes, Javon Johnson, no more snow in the deep south, at least for now, and certainly not with the pattern we have. It does not favor these cold highs coming down like they did back in late December and in early January. And Mary Atkins doesn't need more snow. She wants it to stop. And Timothy says there were more winter storm warnings up for places in the deep south than up your way. Yeah, that's good. That may very well be the case. But remember, their criteria for a winter storm warning is a coating to an inch. Albany's criteria is a whole lot higher than a coating to an inch. 30 miles. I'm just getting to everybody here. I know David Schwartz still hoping for that negative NAO. It may happen. We'll see. Always smiling. I don't always get it. It's 1 degree Celsius here and still snowing. Awesome. You know what? Let's take a look at what's happening in Europe and in the British Isles, which I neglected to do at the onset. But let's bring up the map. And whoops. We noted last week that you guys were going to get into a bit of a wintry pattern here, and there you have this weather front that moved through, and there's your waves of cold air and snow coming in off of Greenland. It shuts off for a little bit, then comes right back late this week, shuts off again with some rain, and then comes right back as we go into early next week. And then it looks like a pretty important front here with some snows later next week. So you've got a very busy wintry pattern ahead of you. Why don't we look at your snowfall? Whoa. Well, that's impressive. Do I have the whole 10-day period? Still a continuation of what the models have been showing for days. A fair amount of snow across Ireland and England. Through all of France, most of Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Italy in the northern part, and down in the higher elevations going down south, and through much of Eastern Europe. So it's still got some wintertime weather to get through. And if this blocking pattern does set up, it'll be interesting to see the impact of what happens over on the European side. If it's a Scandinavian-based block, it might mean a prolonged period of winter weather going into the latter stages of this month and into the beginning of March. Scandinavian-based blocks are usually not positive for the eastern part of the United States. You want the more Greenland-based or west-based block versus an east-based one. But you know what? Got to get the block to form first before let's have the block first before we start worrying about the problem as to where that block actually is or isn't. Our winter is starting in January. February is all messed up. Yeah, but you do have a cold pattern that's setting up through much of Europe for the next week to 10 days. I don't know, David Schwartz, about the La Nina. I haven't really given it a good look lately. And the MJO, people have been kind of waiting for this thing to go into phase 8, and it hasn't done it yet. And it may not do it. Doesn't necessarily mean that it will. Remember, the models these are all model driven, so they're all going to be volatile. If our upper air changes, that changes everything else downstream. So I'll do some digging around with respect to the MJO and see where they're going with this now. But I haven't really, as I said, I haven't been paying too much attention. Weather warnings for the British Isles since 2 a.m. I get such a kick out of the fact that I see it's going to snow up your way. Always smiling. Well, Joseph Miano, I will tell you that with respect to your comment about March being snowier and colder, I did look at some of the climate models earlier this evening, and I did notice that They still continue to go with below average temperatures going into the last 10 days of February and the first part of March. That seems to be holding. Whether that changes in a day or two, or if it's going to change again, I don't know. But right now, it seems to be holding. Mountains east of the Aegean Sea, Franklin Taylor saying they're expecting 120 inches this week alone. The sea on the east side of Italy. Yeah, they could go. It gets pretty hefty with some of the snowfalls there. My grandmother used to tell me stories about being buried and having to basically dig tunnels in the mountain areas to go from one side of the street to the other. Unreal. A month's worth of snow in 36 hours in Moscow. Yeah, they're getting hit pretty hard up in Eastern Europe. All right, folks, going to call it an evening at this point. Check out. Thank you, John Organo. I am feeling a lot better now. I'm through whatever it is I had, and Scott, thermodynamics playing a role. Well, certainly the bottom level of the atmosphere, thermodynamics, going to be very, very important with respect to Wednesday's weather system. So we're going to watch. We're going to watch for model trends over the next day and a half and see if models trend colder. That will at least give us a signal that the snow amounts might play a little higher. Will there be a freezing rain and sleet issue? I think there will be for some areas, and we're going to have to zero in on that when we go into Wednesday. And yes, Timothy Veltman, my pork shoulder was amazing. Okay, it was not just good, it was amazing. If you follow my recipe and my way of doing things and don't change anything, you will be very, very successful. I gave my recipe once to someone, and they came back to me and said, mine didn't come out as good as yours. So I said, what did you do? And they told me that they started describing to me what they did. They said, well, I know you said to cook it at 200 degrees, but I cooked it at 350. And I know you said to cook it in the oven, but I cooked it in the crock pot. And you're wondering why it didn't come out the same way mine did? Really? Amazing. Anyway, check out website posts on meteorologistjoecioffi.com. If you're new to my channel, welcome aboard. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is absolutely free, and set yourself up to get notifications as we live stream at least once a day, and sometimes in storm situations, we live stream more than once a day. All right, folks, have a great rest of your Monday, and we will talk to you tomorrow.